Good Friday morning. Welcome back to another episode of Finding God in the Dark. And my name is Don Stevens.
I'm Jonathan Campbell.
And this week we are talking about the 2024 film Dune Part 2, which obviously by its title is the second part of a two-part. I think it. Do you
Three-parted.
think it might do more?
Yeah, but my understanding is he wants to do Messiah.
Okay.
So
Okay. So there'll probably be a third, but this is a epic film
mhm,
directed by Denis Villeneuve, who you
yeah,
may know for if you've ever seen Arrival. That's a great film.
yeah, it is.
Directed that as well. Stars Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Austin Butler, Dave Bautista, Christopher Walken. Big name cast.
Yeah,
Um, it is based on gosh, when did those books come out? The Frank Herbert novels in the
60s, I
late
believe.
60s? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I remember reading when I was a kid, right around the same time I was reading stuff like the Chronicles of Elric and a lot of high fantasy, Tolkien, stuff like that.
yeah,
Um, so I want to give a shout out, sort of a co-production credit, if you
yeah.
will, today to Jonathan's son Nathan,
Yep.
who watched the podcast from last week. I
Yep.
give it credit,
Yep.
watched it, listened to it, and went, I liked it, but you guys kept kind of circling back and coming back. Yes, because when you put two pastors in a room together, we're going to wander around a little bit in the conversation. It just happens.
Yep.
Um, but uh, he in response to that, has given us some thoughts
Yep.
about what would be some great ideas to talk about with this film, and is an exhaustive list. If we had unlimited time, we could probably beat
Yeah.
this list to death for about an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't have that much time, but um, I want to pull it up on my phone
Yeah.
because we had just a couple of things we want to lift out of that list to
Yeah.
talk about today.
Yeah.
Uh, it is, for those unfamiliar, Dune is science fiction. It is based in an alternate universe, if you
Yeah.
will. Um, and one of the, so we'll jump into one of the things. Uh, One of the ones that I wanted to talk about was that I remember reading it as a my teens and 20s,
Yeah.
that a lot of the stuff I read about it was that it was an allegorical tale,
Yeah.
and it had a lot to do with the control of oil in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And he was just setting it in a sort of a space setting, and instead of
Yeah.
oil, it's something called spice.
Yeah.
Which the interesting thing about spice, they don't really cover it so much, I think, in the films as they do in the book.
Okay.
But spice is required for certain creatures that I don't even remember them being in this film,
Yeah.
that are able to use the spice to warp space and
Yeah.
create jump holes and travel space
Yeah.
so it's basically it's energy. So it is, you can see the comparison there.
Yeah.
And
But there's
sort
also
of
a
the
spiritual.
allegory,
There's also a spiritual dimension to it,
there is, yes.
and yeah. So. I think you can read a lot into this idea of that 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 our fuel sources sometimes become almost holy grails for us and things that impact us in our spiritual lives as much as they do transportation. So
Yeah.
one thing I thought about, which is a complete disconnect, but one thing I thought about is there's a great line from a West Wing episode where somebody says, "Well, if a war hasn't been fought over oil, the next one will." And
Mm.
it's that idea of um, our ability to move around our world is so important that it can become the thing that dictates how we live, how we interact with people, how we view them as important or not important. And I think he wanted to explore that in his writing. That idea of, especially, you get a deep sense of his his wanting us to struggle with colonization, right? Because
Right.
like Arrakis, you could argue the Middle East was colonized by Europeans and by America so that they could get access to oil. I mean, that's why they did it, and that's why they tried to control that region and decide who the leaders were. And for centuries, we've been dictating terms to that country and the people in that area of the world, in large part, so we could access energy through oil. I mean,
Well, and I mean, indeed, I don't think it's a quote in the film, but I mean, it's a very real idea that he who controls the energy controls the world, right?
yep, yep,
And so you see that on a, it's obviously on a grander scale, right?
yeah,
Because you had to control Arrakis,
yeah,
control the spice planet,
yeah,
the only planet that produces this spice.
nice, yeah,
Um, and if you do, whoever controls it controls the universe.
yeah,
So Herbert's taken it to a grander scale, but it is very much the same idea. And I mean, set on a desert world,
yeah,
with a, sort of a nomadic desert people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, if it that one is a really easy, that's not a leap of faith.
No,
That one's
that's not a hard
really
read.
obvious.
That's not a hard read, no.
Yeah, no, that
Um,
one's
and
really jumps right off the page.
and on top of that, we can go into another thing we wanted to talk about is you get this sense of, and I don't know, I've never read the books, and I really have engaged with his work primarily through these two films. I really think they're well done. The ideas that he clearly wrote into his novels are really powerful and I think profound ideas for us to struggle with. So I've really engaged with these films. One of the things that I've read, though, about him is he also used these series of books, to really push back against the idea of a savior figure or a messiah figure that was very prevalent in science fiction and fantasy novels. And
Yeah.
he wanted to kind of question that idea. And you get that sense, and you're starting to get, especially at the end of this movie, you really get, I don't want to give too much of the movie away, but you really get a sense at the end of the movie that this savior figure, Paul, is not as good a person as you think he is, and he's being corrupted by power. And I think that idea of the white savior figure that is throughout literature, white people have a tendency to, a lot of times view the people from other lands as beneath them and needing to be saved, and you get that flavor in this book of this movie, of this idea of Paul's coming in and he's going to rescue us all, or at least there's a big faction of the Furman that believe he's going to come rescue us. He's gonna lead us to salvation. And
The oddly the Fremen from the South.
yeah, yeah, which is interesting. Yeah, Bible
Draw
Belt,
your own
all that stuff.
conclusions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say he was thinking about the Bible Belt and thinking about, the kind of religious fervor, because
Yeah, well, assuming I don't know a lot about Frank Herbert, but assuming he was
yeah,
American, then
yeah,
you could probably
yeah.
draw that. Yeah.
Well, he especially talks about fundamentalism a lot. In the movie, I'm guessing in the book he does too. And that could also lead us into, we probably want to for a moment stay with the colonization piece, but Americans have a really bad time really understanding and accepting kind of the overreaches of their history, of you know of the dangers of viewing people that aren't like us as inferior to us. We did it with Native Americans, we did it with African Americans, and we still struggle with kind of coming to terms with that. And this this movie wants you to kind of struggle with the idea of what's right in terms of colonization, what goes wrong, you know, um, and the reality that oftentimes the people that are colonized are viewed as just resources. They're just for our use, and that really cuts against the Christian ideal that everybody's made in the image of God, so they all have value, right?
Yeah, it's yeah, and this is a, an obvious thing here because the people who are controlling the spice trade are
Yeah,
not the native people to this planet.
no,
It's not the Fremen. It's the Harkonnens and the Atreides are controlling this, and they are basically appointed there by the Emperor.
yeah, and the Furmans, from what at least I never read the books, but at least from the movies, the Furmans aren't benefiting at all from from the spice trade. Like, it
No,
doesn't
not
seem like.
from the spice trade. No, certainly not. Yeah,
No. So the use of the resources that is connected only to their planet, they don't seem to be directly benefiting from, you know.
right. Yeah, no, I mean, their benefit is that I mean, it's in their food. It's in,
Yeah.
so it's part of the spice is an integral part of their culture,
Of their
particularly
life,
the
right?
religious side of their culture.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's a mystical connection
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe we want to transition over to that.
Yeah, I thought we could talk about the idea about when I worked up this list, I was thinking, um, I don't know if you get this. Sometimes I get this. I'll get a Christian come up to me and go like, "Why don't Jews just understand Jesus is the Messiah?" Like they'll be just like, you know, and then I have to have this conversation about the fact that prophecies can be interpreted different ways,
Right.
and Christians have interpreted them one way, and Jews have interpreted them another. And um, and you get that in this film, right? They kind of break it down northern and southern, but you but even outside that context, you have a group of Furman who everything Paul does points to a prophecy and fulfills a prophecy. And then you have another group of Furman that are like, well, there could be five different reasons for why this worked out this way. Or I'm not sure it points to him, or I'm not sure I believe in the prophecy to begin with. Like,
There's definitely, and that's particularly the younger people, the younger Fremen in the film are the ones who's like, yeah, I don't know about this prophecy. Doesn't make any sense to me, right?
yeah. And
Um,
so this idea of interpretation and who interprets the prophecy has the power, you know, um, and it's interesting that at
or
first,
is it, or
yeah,
for a second there, or is it whose interpretation of the prophecy
wins out.
wins the more minds
Yeah,
has
wins
the
the hearts
power?
and mind. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
way to put it. So the person's interpretation that wins the most backing becomes becomes the source of their power. And
right.
you see this in this movie because Paul at first doesn't want to accept the idea that this prophecy has anything to do with him, and he kind of doesn't want power. He wants to be part of this movement. Becomes attached to these people, but he at first feels like, well, they should lead and I'll follow and I'll be part of this movement. But but over time, you could argue he takes the easy way out, right? Instead of going, hey, let's figure this out together, let's work together and and push back against the empire. He kind of realizes that it's going to be effectively a cheat code for him if he just kind of embraces the fact that he's this messianic figure. Because if he's this messianic figure, over half of the group will just do whatever he says.
And, it's funny, the terms stick with me. The Kwisatz Haderach,
Okay.
right? That
Yeah.
is the Messiah, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah.
The and there's there's such a dynamic of power in this,
Yeah.
and yet it's really interesting the way that I think Herbert deals with it, and the way that Denis Villeneuve, who also co-wrote the film,
Yeah.
deals with it here. In that initially Paul Atreides comes to it, he's sort of this reluctant, it's like other people are pushing him, like, you're the Messiah, you're the Messiah, you're the Messiah.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, no, I don't know. I don't think I want to do that. But then I think I, I don't recall the exact turning point, but there is a turning point in the film where he realizes that
Probably the
there's
water of life.
immense
Yeah.
power for him to
For him.
retaliate
Yeah.
against the people who killed his father.
You could also look, one of the turning points would be the when he takes the water of life,
Mhm.
which is a secretion of the earthworms
The
that are
sandworms, yeah.
the sandworms that are part of this planet. And he starts being able to kind of, I don't want to say read minds, but know things he shouldn't otherwise know or you wouldn't expect him to know. And once he does that, he then uses that asset, he uses that ability that develops. He uses it not to kind of unify the people for the mission, right? But he uses it to unify the people around him, um, believing that he's the best person to get the mission done. So it goes back to a conversation we had last week about the ends justify the means. So he begins to believe the best way to conquer the empire and get rid of all these horrible people is for me to take charge.
And be a horrible person.
Yeah,
Because in the end,
yeah,
he betrays his own love interest for
yes,
power,
yes,
to marry the emperor's daughter for power.
yeah.
So yeah, it's really it's a fascinating film because it is what was the one we were watching we watched a couple weeks ago is like very much a political thriller. That's what this is.
Mhm.
It is a political power thriller.
Yes,
Um, it's long. I think the film's what, 2 hours and 40 minutes or so, something like
yeah,
that.
mhm.
And that's the second part
Yeah,
of two films.
yeah,
Uh, but there's that sense of Paul is manipulating the what's in his maybe almost maybe the ignorance of the Fremen, right? The
mhm.
naivete of the Fremen because they have such overwhelming numbers and they're such good fighters. And he's taking that prophecy, whether he's actually the Kwisatz Haderach or not, he's
Yeah,
taking that prophecy and manipulating it to his own ends because
yeah.
what he ultimately desires is to get back at the people
He
who
wants
killed his
revenge.
father.
He wants revenge.
Yeah, he wants revenge. And the interesting thing we find out late in the film is that it's revenge against his own family
Yeah.
because his mother is from that family. And it's a very, in some ways, a very twisted film.
Well, yeah, and again, it's this idea that um, it's this idea that as long as the good thing happens, it doesn't matter how we get the good thing. And of course,
But then it's still questionable, like, is that necessarily a good thing?
yeah, and then of course that's the question of who decides it's good the good thing.
Right.
Because you could make an argument that Paul might not be any better for the Furman than the Empire was.
Right.
There's
Well, I
no
mean, let's
oh,
well think about that for a second. That's because that's an excellent point. Because
yeah,
at the very end, all of the great houses come, you
yeah,
know, and they don't accept Paul's ascension. And so what does he do? He sends the Fremen, go introduce them to paradise.
yeah,
So he just sent them off to fight a space war when they're
yeah,
used to being desert fighters.
yeah.
I mean, very likely just sent them to their deaths.
Well, and again, he at the beginning, at the first film and at the beginning of the second film, he's really disturbed, and rightfully so. He's disturbed by how the Empire treats the Furman as disposable. And yet, we have at the end of this movie, right?
He
He's
treats them
sending
as
them off as disposable.
he does the exact same
And
thing.
you
Yep.
get, I don't know if you caught it, but right at the end of right at the beginning of the movie, after the Harkonnens have reconquered Arrakis and defeated Atreides, um, they have a scene where they're burning all the bodies.
Hmm.
And then at the end of this movie, where Paul takes control, you literally have the same scene. You could cut both scenes. It's a group of people burning all of these dead bodies. And to me, it was just this statement of this weird statement he was trying to make of that we're in the same place. We've done this loop, and we've changed and rearranged the characters, but in the end, we are burning the dead.
And does this harken back to something I think we've talked about previously in that, power corrupts and
Yeah,
absolute power corrupts
absolutely.
absolutely.
And
And
I
this
yeah
is, at least for the Fremen, Paul has taken pretty much absolute power.
yeah
These people will follow him to their death because
yeah
they believe that he is their Messiah,
yeah.
you know?
And yeah, and I think as Christians, um, Christianity was a big proponent in, a manifest destiny in the 1800s and early 1900s, where it was people really, Christians and pastors preached this idea that God has given us America to conquer, and God has given us all of America. And it doesn't matter who's there, it doesn't matter what their lives are. God has given all of this to us. And that idea was fueled by Christianity. And I would argue, it was fueled by a really bad interpretation of Christianity, but it was still fueled by Christians and pastors and people using the Bible and using the idea of, the kingdom of God to basically say, whoever is in our way, we can treat them however we want to.
Yeah, scary.
Yes.
And you're right. So much of this plays out, these ideas play out in this film.
Yeah.
Um, it is, there's very little in this film to not like,
Yes.
to be honest. I think if I think my one sticking point in the whole film,
Yeah.
because I have to say, I mean, I've only seen a couple of films by this director.
Yeah.
I think he's fantastic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But he's
Um,
really good at science fiction. He does science fiction really well.
oh my gosh, like I said, watch Arrival. That is a
Yeah,
phenomenal film.
it is a beautiful film.
But if I have one thing in this film, I would recast Zendaya, her
Okay,
role. I I
okay,
ju- I don't buy her as the Fremen character. I just don't. I don't know whether it's her acting or what it is, but to me, I don't see it, you know?
yeah. And what I will agree that there didn't seem to be a great deal of chemistry between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, I think that's a part of this that would have enhanced the film, is because you want to get this sense of that he's leaving the love of his life. That's what I'm assuming the books want to communicate, that he's sacrificing love for power, right? And I didn't get a deep sense of their deep connection, and it
No.
it it felt kind of like, oh, I'm just going with this other cute girl. Like that was, there didn't seem to be like this ripping apart, because to me that is kind of that is part of powerful literature, is of this idea of humans being sacrificing love for power.
Right.
That's
Or at the very least, sacrificing relationship, right? Because, he says to her, I will love you as long as I breathe. And then he turns around and demands the hand of the emperor's daughter.
yeah.
And you go, okay, did you really mean what you just said? Or,
Well, and even I loved, I don't know if it was the director or if it was Chalamet, but I loved when the emperor didn't give him his due quick enough. He stomped his foot like a little petulant child, like now, like. And I loved that choice, that acting choice or that directing choice, because you see him descend from this guy that you would be like, oh, we should be like this guy. We should aspire to be like this guy, to a petulant little child, to a a brat.
Yeah, there really is from if you go from the beginning of the first film and the Paul Atreides that you meet in the beginning of the first film
Yeah,
all the way through, there is an incredible arc for that
yeah,
character in these two films.
yeah.
And I love that. I've said it before. I love a good character arc, and his character arc in these two films is really excellent.
Well, and you see in that moment, I would argue, you see the loss of his father,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The loss of
oh
the
sure,
influence of his father, because you would almost argue his what we like about him is because he's firmly rooted in the foundation of his father and who his father is.
yeah,
And then by the end of the movie, even though he puts back on his father's ring and claims the Duke ship of the planet, right? He's lost the anchor of his father because of how he now acts around power and around others. Which leads into one of the things I wanted to talk about was there's this powerful scene at the end of the movie where the emperor admits to killing his father, or not killing him, but basically directing,
arranging it. Yeah,
arranging his killing. And he says, he essentially says, I did it. I don't have the words right in front of me, but basically said, I killed your father because your father is ruled by the heart, and that will always make him a bad leader. And I wanted to talk about that because that gave me a lot of pause because I don't think that's something that as Christians we should affirm. The idea that
I'm
being
with you.
being led by your heart will necessarily make you a bad leader. Now, could we make an argument that you have to be led by more than just your emotions? Absolutely.
Right.
But the idea that I'm going to lead with compassion and mercy, I would argue that's how Jesus led.
Well, and I think you could probably make the argument that the emperor is thinking strictly from a position of power,
Yeah,
right? That power leading with something other than power, or with rather leading with your heart when you are strictly about power, it's not going to work.
yeah,
But let's be honest, if you had a clergy person,
yeah,
someone like us, who didn't lead with their heart and led like the emperor
yeah,
only from a position of power, they'd be a very bad pastor.
yeah. Well,
Oh,
and I would argue, I guess this is where I will push back on that the reading in the emperor's reading of the situation, right? The emperor is right in the sense that you cannot have as much power and you cannot control as much if you lead by compassion and mercy. But I would argue you probably would have a better empire, or you'd have a better world, or at least you'd have a better Arrakis if you had a leader who led by compassion and mercy.
it, it
Yeah.
would be an infinitely better place to live.
Yes. And so the emperor's right in the sense that you can't have as much, or you can't have as much control, at least if you're going to lead with compassion and mercy. But I would argue that the people that you lead probably would have a better life.
Yeah, without question there has to be a balance there.
Yeah,
You can't lead solely with heart, but you can't lead solely with power either. There
yeah,
has to be some kind of benevolent balance there.
yeah.
Something that says, you care about people, but still we've got to have some rules and some ways of doing things, right?
Well, and I would argue that the emperor is basically saying that the first priority of a leader can't be the people they're leading, and I would disagree with that. I would almost say, almost always, your first duty is to the well-being of the people you lead.
I'll agree with that. I can agree with that. Yeah. No argument with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are, like I said, we could exhaust this film.
Yes.
It could take us a very long time to get through Nathan's list. And thank you for the list, Nathan. We
Yeah.
appreciate it. In fact, if you want to keep watching the films and writing us a list, we'll pick something off it every week. I guarantee you, because it makes for good directed conversation, and
Mhm.
we need that, obviously.
Yes.
So, that being said, we're going to move on to next week's film, which has already been picked out.
Yeah.
We have been talking about it for several weeks now. The film is The Brutalist.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned before, it won the Golden Globe this year for Best Picture. It stars Adrian Brody. It is a very long film, 3.5 hours with an intermission. If you go see it well, I don't think you can see it anywhere but theaters right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and only a limited number of theaters at that. So, we will be having a special guest next week. I
Yeah.
have not, well, I've told people from my churches know who it is.
Oh,
Um,
I
so,
have not shared it with anybody.
well, I'm very excited about it.
Oh,
So,
cool.
I want people to watch. I want people to, to be
Yeah,
interested. And so I'm trying to pique folks' interest in it.
absolutely.
And so maybe we can say so now, since it is next week,
Yeah.
that our special guest that we've been hyping up for the last several weeks will be the new appointed bishop for our conference, our annual conference,
Yeah.
Reverend Cynthia Moore Kikoi. She will be with us. We will be recording on the conference's Zoom link, which means we will not be as time limited as we are normally. So we'll have a little bit more time to talk about what looks like a really interesting film.
Yeah.
There's probably
I'm
going to
excited.
be quite a bit of theme to dig into there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we are very excited about it. We will take I think we will take a little bit of time just to get to know the bishop at the beginning, and
Sure.
then we'll jump into the film. I don't want to. I don't. People have plenty of opportunities to meet the bishop and get to know
Yeah.
her a little bit. So we're not going to dig real deep into that. I want us to stay on our task, which is talking about the movies. So we will do that more than introduction. But I do want to give her a chance to introduce herself and maybe talk about why she loves movies or what movies she loves to watch or whatever. So.
Yeah.
Um, so that will be next week. We're watching The Brutalist, and our new resident bishop will be with us. So, like I said, we're we're really excited about that.
Absolutely.
Think
And
it's a
our
think it's
co-host will be back too, so that'll be fun.
Evan has promised he will be here, and look, we talked to Evan. He and I are planning to have lunch next week. I don't know if you got that message, Jonathan, but
Yeah.
well, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
But Evans, he's had some challenges, and
Yeah.
so he hasn't been able to be here. The door is always open for Evan, even if he hasn't watched the movie. He is
Yeah.
welcome to come in and just, hitch his wagon to our discussion. It's all good. Because we do what we do, right? We've had that conversation any number of times.
Yep.
Um, so we're just thankful that some folks are interested and want to hear us blather about movies.
Yep.
So.
We
All that being,
apologize for all our bad takes.
we apologize in advance for all of our terrible takes on things. And if you disagree with us, tell us about it. I mean, leave us a
Comment,
comment. I'll
absolutely.
be happy to address that.
Yep.
All that being said, friends, thank you for watching this week. Let us know what you thought if you've seen Dune 2. Let us
Yep.
know what you thought about it. Go out this week and see The Brutalist and join us for the conversation next week with our new bishop. Again, we think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity. So, all that being said, friends, keep on finding God in the dark. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're enjoying these discussions, please consider hitting the like button down below or subscribing to follow along. We put out weekly episodes on Friday mornings, and we are so glad that you're finding this discussion of theology and film entertaining enough to follow along with us. Take care and God bless, friends.